Achieving equality has been a constant struggle for blacks in America, and in Missouri, formerly a slave state, that effort was intensified. In 1847, an historic decision was made in this courthouse. It was the first step toward equal rights for blacks in America. Dred Scott, a slave, suing for his freedom, was not even allowed inside this building to represent himself. Hello, I'm Officer Alan Green with the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. Thanks to the efforts of black men like Scott and the accomplishments of the officers who have served before me, this is a tribute to our black police officers. At the turn of the century, resentment toward the police department was high in the black community because blacks weren't represented in the department. It was 1899 when blacks first began testing for appointments. But it wasn't until 1901 when public and political pressure forced the hiring of Alan Wilkinson and Andrew Gordon. These two officers were assigned to the Chief of Detectives as special officers. Today, a special officer would be considered a district detective. Now stop and think. Don't you find that to be strange? But in order to assure the general public that these two special officers were not equivalent to a white officer, they weren't allowed the prestige of wearing a patrolman's uniform. By 1910, there were 5 black special officers. One of those officers, Ira Cooper, would later be hailed as the world's greatest detective. Cooper was an outstanding investigator who many times was called into a case only after all other detectives had given up. Among the cases that he solved were the kidnapping of August A. Bush's grandson and the world-famous Mercantile Bank robbery, which even baffled the top detective agencies in the country.
Ira Cooper said as the minute that he walked into the door of the bank, there was a colored fellow as a janitor, and he was mopping or sweeping, and he couldn't sweep without looking at Lieutenant Cooper. Cooper looked out the corner of his eyes, and right then he said, a thought came to him, that's your number one suspect. Well, this number one suspect had a cousin that was highly educated. And whenever this person that was losing all this money would make a big deposit in the bank, this old man worked in there as a janitor, sent a telegram to New York, come to town, bacon is here. At night they let him in. He'd climb over the cage and get one of the bank teller's book and forge a withdrawal on some, let's say Anheuser-Busch's account. It was somebody that had a big account. So after about 4 or 5 months of investigation, following this guy and seeing his MO, what he was doing and whatnot, they were able to crack that case. And he got all kind of praise. They had fellas in from Scotland Yard, from England, trying to solve that. They never did.
At the time of Cooper's death in 1939, he was one of 4 officers in America and the only member of his race to receive a Scotland Yard card, presented with a kiss by the Queen of England. In 1936, the city had only 25 black policemen. One of those officers was Thomas Brooks, who rose to the rank of major before retiring. Another was Oliver Middlebrooks, who, legend has it, was the first black officer to ever arrest a white man in St. Louis. A new position created in the department was that of corporal. John Griggs was one of the first.
When I began working in the police department, I was in the old 8th district. That was around Jefferson and Market. Jefferson and Shoto. The 8th district, that was predominantly black. It was a segregated department. That's what it was. Oh, we got along at the station. We're like brothers at the station. Yeah.
By 1943, the number of black officers had increased to 36. Just a small percentage of the department's 2,000 policemen. Ernest Troop, later to become Captain Troop, the first black night watch commander, recalls those days.
Our neighborhood where I walked was, you said 99% all black. The only white was in the neighborhood was the white business people who had the grocery stores or furniture stores or something like that. I didn't have any bad times with the people in the neighborhood. However, I did feel segregated that I wasn't allowed to ride in a patrol car. If a car got a call, the sergeant and his two boys would come and get a black policeman say, make this report.
The first all-black police platoon in the history of the department went on duty December 8, 1949. Sergeant James Taylor, commander of the 14-man unit, was the first uniformed sergeant of his race and the first to head a platoon.
I can't remember the exact day, but the first uniformed sergeant was put out was Sergeant Taylor. And he got a whole platoon of black police officers. And he was the sergeant in the car. But before that, there was no black officers in the car. They all was on the foot beat. Yeah.
We had officers assigned all over the 1st Precinct, and that was a brand new thing.
Atkins Warren was the first black to achieve the rank of major and lieutenant colonel.
He was my 2nd sergeant, and he was the first black sergeant in uniform and the first to command a precinct. And we all started out on the 3rd watch. And there was some question as to if we would be allowed to leave the 3rd watch. Would we continue to work the 3rd watch all the time? And of course, in the military platoon type setting, row for roll call, the 1st precinct is normally the 1st row. But they moved our precinct back to the 3rd row. And so, they just turned it around, and it was really something we kind of smiled, but we expected that. We really did, and of course our sergeant used to use the expression of that does not bother us. We are their best policemen, and that's the way we went. And he had not experienced much more than that, but I'm sure to him, being our leader as a sergeant, it was degrading that they would switch us around in such a manner.
Eleanor Hall, who joined the force in 1956, became the first black female sergeant.
I was first in police community relations. You aren't talking about the promotion, because that came years later. The promotion, I was the first African American sergeant, and I had to work almost about 18 years before I got that, I see. And I was the first one to picket, I think, in the station, back and forth to get the ladies' restroom. I really picketed. And I threatened to go home. I know you weren't supposed to get your car and go home, but I didn't live far from the district. I said, if I don't get a bathroom in here, I'm going home. So you write me up, and I'm going to rewrite you up, because there's no facilities for ladies. There were no facilities. So they took a broom closet and made a ladies' room, put a lock on it.
Lieutenant Colonel William Brown was the first black chief of detectives.
Well, when I first came on, community relations-wise, I loved it. I thought that we had a better inroad to the community. At that particular time, because of circumstances, the black community was all together in one spot. And the black officers, naturally, that's where we patrol. We walked the beats. And that's why I think it was so good. We had school corners. I got to know the kids in the community, from little kids in kindergarten on up through high school.
In 1964, the Civil Rights Bill was enacted. There was a lot of social unrest, and it didn't make it any easier to be black in blue. Internationally acclaimed civil rights activist Captain Charles Alphen explains why.
We took more pressure from the black community because there was a distrust in the police department. We were classified as Uncle Tom, as part of the system. We had now joined a system that had been very barbaric and inhumane to blacks, and they saw us as a person that had joined an evil system to continue to oppress them in the city of St. Louis.
During those troubled times, Colonel Clifton Gates was one of the first and only black on the Board of Police Commissioners.
Mid-60s, maybe early 70, but we were successful as a board to gain a number of increases for the police officers. Our board made a number of trips. I don't know if this board does these sort of things or previous boards, but we made all the hearings in Jeff City and testified before the various committees with a set of facts that we were able to put together to justify why our police officers needed this particular increase. And as a result, over the years, we were able to get several increases.
Any officer can tell you that most of police work is communicating and talking to people, and black officers are no exception.
You know, my first assignment was to walk with Patrolman Ezell Nance, and I was to meet him on the corner of Whittier and Martin Luther King. It was Whittier and Easton then. I got to the corner about 5 o'clock at Whittier and Martin Luther King, and I had to wait there until Nance arrived. And during the course of that time, various people along the street, this is my first experience, began to come up and test me. I said test, some would speak, some got a little loud, some said, you know, I know this is a new guy, we ought to check him out, you know, and I'm going, all of these things are happening to me, and then finally Ezell showed. And the one little thing that he showed me was how cooperative people were, how easy it was to influence people. And he says, watch me. And as the streetcar stopped at the intersection, and this would have been on Martin Luther King and Newstead, he raised his hand and waved at the people on the streetcar. And almost 90% of those people waved back. He said, "Do you see that?" He said, "Now they did that automatically." He said, "So it's into people to want to be friendly." He said, "The rest is up to you."
People in my neighborhood like me. I got along fine in my neighborhood because I did the favors for them. I'd go out of my way. I was kind of a chairman of the block unit around here and all that.
It was my theory every time I arrested a person, I got him for a certain crime, I had a little notebook. If he had a picture, I'd go to Identification Bureau and get the picture, and I'd staple it on the page, then I'd write his M.O., what he was capable of doing when he was arrested. I did that all the time, and many times as I answered a call for police for robbery or burglary, and the people would start giving me description of what the person looked like, I'd come up with the picture. They said, "Well, how did you know that?" If you know most crooks, whatever they do once, they'll do it again. Very seldom they'll ever quit. They continue to do their MO, modus operandi, whether it's purse snatching, whether it's robbery or burglary. Try to keep a Bible, as I always use, on the crooks, and you can go places. But if you try to keep it all up here, don't stay up there. Just have your little notebook and pictures, and you'll be surprised what you can get out. Most of the crimes that I saw was done like that, or talking with informers. No policeman is no greater than his source of information. You cannot look in a crystal ball and tell what's happening. Talk to people. Some people are very hinky when they talk with policemen. If you're talking to a person and you notice that he has an attitude, he don't want to talk right now, but later you can talk with him. See, you get his name and address. Some of them say, "Look, I can't talk to you right now, but come over to my house sometime tonight. I'll let you know." You got to be sharp enough to pick up on those things when you're talking to one of those individuals.
I was a sergeant then on a particular incident, and I took an officer with me into a tavern right after a major shooting. Nobody knew anything. And the officer, young officer, was frustrated. I said, "Look, don't let that bother you." I went right out of the place, went right to a telephone, and made a phone call. And I told the person that I called, "Listen, we just had a shooting in this tavern. Nobody knows anything. One guy's gone to the hospital," and so forth and so on. He says, "Call me back in about an hour." Called him back in about an hour. He gave me the guy's name, where he was, where the weapon was. And I showed this to the young officer that was with me. I said, this is how you find out what you need to find out. So those people are afraid to talk to you in that tavern because they think their friends are going to find out. So there are various strategies that you learn, that you should learn. So you can't be down on them for not talking. You know, they have to be very careful. But if you know the people, and you've been communicating with them all the time, all you need to do is look a few of them over, get to them away from the crowd. So those are little key things that we learn as policemen.
Some people would wait until we came on duty to tell us about certain things that were happening in the neighborhood. If there was a person in the neighborhood walking around, he didn't live in the neighborhood, people would point them out to us. We had a very good rapport with the neighborhood, which helped us with our crime.
In one case that maybe I should mention, but it actually was child brutality. A little young man came in with his mother, and she was uneducated, and she went to say something, and he cursed his mother. And I was fairly new on the job. He cursed his mother, and she just dropped her head, and I walked over to him and hit him so hard he slid down the wall like in movies. 12 years later, I was in Famous, and this young man walked up to me, I didn't know who he was, and said, I want to thank you for that lick. I said, thank me? He said, you're Officer Hall, aren't you? I said, I certainly am. And he said, that was the best lick I ever had. I went to the Army, and here's Mama now, and she was dragging up, and that made me feel good. So that was one I remember, and I'll always remember when I worked on the a street as, not as a prostitute, but in the prostitution area. Boy, they gave me a time. Even my friends came over to see me, but I didn't dress any particular way, but they were about to carry Washington and Delmar away. And I was put out there and wired up and what have you. So that was the easiest job, because when I said, well, if she's out there tomorrow, I'll be back. So it was just, it was a fun thing, but it was a serious thing too. And it did deter prostitution in that area for a long while, because their names were in the papers, and I caught some big ones.
Well, I found that the best position to take was not to react, so to speak. I mean, I was attacked. You might imagine, I had the building, and I had my office. The sidewalks were painted, stop white police from shooting us, and all this sort of thing. My home was picketed, and what have you, and I found the best reaction there was to take them Coke and coffee and make them comfortable, invite them in out of the sun. And in other words, I tried not to react. And I think by keeping a sane approach to it, we were able to sit down and hopefully resolve some of the matters and make it perfectly clear that whatever you felt was there as evil was not going away just because the black sat on the board. So confronting the problem on a one-on-one basis, I think, did a lot to avert. If you notice, St. Louis never had a riot. All the other major cities during the heat of the 60s were having all sorts of upheavals. And everyone who's in law enforcement, not only in St. Louis but other cities, I think, credited St. Louis' ability to meet and deal with the citizen one-on-one as the thing that averted a lot of that.
Time constraints prevent us from featuring all the illustrious and remarkable black officers that have served on the department. But to name a few: Colonel Ted McNeil, first black to preside over the Board of Police Commissioners; Lieutenant Barry Berry, first black commander of the Training Division and the first to graduate head of his class at the Academy; Sergeant Percy Waters received the Medal of Valor, the highest community award for law officers; Sergeant Oral Jennings, first black officer in K-9 Division; Major Clarence Harmon, first black to be Secretary of the Board of Police Commissioners; Lieutenant Will Gooden, first black in the Traffic Division; Captain Edward Bowden, first black captain in the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department; Lieutenant Audrey Lee, first black female lieutenant. Police Officer Flora Mae Jones, first black female police officer. Captain Robert Lewis, first black commander of the Mounted Police. As of this taping, there are 426 black officers currently serving in this department. That's roughly 27% of this department's commissioned strength.
Black officers have always been good investigators. They've been tenacious in the pursuit of criminals. When I first came into the department, I guess we were probably 10%, maybe even a little lower than that, in black officers. My memory serves me correct. We had 4 officers, black officers, in my academy class. We started, I guess, in the late 70s, right around 1980. We were 18% when the affirmative action program came online, and we've been trying to get it up to 30%. Well, right after we had the affirmative action agreement in 1980, the hiring freezes went on, where we went for maybe 3-4 years without any classes at all, and that hurt us. But since, I guess since 1985, we've been hiring at a clip around 45-46% black. But again, we're trying to recruit the people who will be the tenacious investigators, the good, solid police officers that the department has been known for throughout the years. And for that reason, we're very selective. Presently, we're looking at recruiting in college campuses throughout the country. We're looking to get the cream of the crop to be police officers in the city of St. Louis.
Those who answer the call to duty in law enforcement daily put their lives on the line to protect everyone's safety and property. This tribute is dedicated to those officers who made the ultimate sacrifice. And those officers are John L. Summers, killed in the line of duty April 5th, 1973. Claude C. Smith, killed in the line of duty April 24th, 1974. William N. Campbell, killed in the line of duty May 30th, 1979. Lorenzo L. Rogers, killed in the line of duty June 12th, 1990.